Ever feel like history class glossed over some pretty major figures?
I know what you mean.
Like, we're talking about a queen, an ancient powerhouse.
A queen.
Yeah, the Queen of Sheba, international diplomacy, a woman holding her own in a totally male-dominated world.
Wow, that's a story I'd love to hear more about.
Yeah, and get this, we're looking at her story through the lens of the Qur'an.
Okay.
We've got Dr. Abla Hasan's book as our guide, Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Qur'an.
Interesting.
She uncovers, like, this whole other side to the Queen of Sheba, challenges those old interpretations, shines a light on the Qur'an's message of gender equality.
That's fascinating. How does language shape our view of history?
Totally. Okay, so before we get deep into Dr. Hasan's insights, let's recap the Queen of Sheba's story from the Qur'an. Surah 27, 23, 44.
Right, a little refresher.
Like a quick trip back to Sunday school.
Sounds like a plan.
So there's this incredible queen, right, ruling her kingdom when a hoopoe bird...
The one with the cool crown.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. Anyway, it stumbles upon her kingdom, flies back to King Solomon,
Okay.
and tells him about her. Solomon sends the queen a letter. She thinks it over, chats with her advisors.
It moves.
Oh, yeah. Ultimately, she sends Solomon gifts. But that's not where it ends. Eventually, she travels to meet Solomon, sees his wisdom firsthand, his connection to God, and submits to God.
Okay, so how does Dr. Hasan's book fit into this?
Right, so here's where it gets really interesting. You know how we always hear about Solomon being blessed with, like, wisdom and power?
Yeah.
Well, the Quran uses the same phrase, the exact same phrase, to describe both Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
No way. Seriously, what phrase?
They're both described as being given a share of everything.
Given a share of everything. So what? They had the same stuff.
Not just stuff, it's bigger than that. Dr. Hasan points out it's not just about wealth, but qualities, authority, leadership. The Qur'an puts them on equal footing.
Oh, wow, that changes things.
Right, like she's stepping out of the shadows of history.
Totally. She's demanding her rightful place. Does Dr. Hasan talk about how the Quran describes the queen's actual rule?
Oh, absolutely. She dives into this word, tamlikuhum. It's from the Arabic root word for ownership and authority.
Whoa. Ownership and authority? That's powerful.
Right. These little linguistic clues, they unlock a whole other level of the story.
It makes you wonder what other details we're missing when we just skim the surface.
It's like we're finally seeing her story, not just Solomon's.
Yeah, like she's a person.
Exactly. But you know how when the queen ultimately submits to God, it's often interpreted as, like, a defeat.
Yeah, I've heard that. But Dr. Hasan sees it differently.
It is, totally. She's like, hold on, this isn't about defeat. This is about her intelligence. It's about diplomacy.
So, she's not just reacting to Solomon, it's more strategic.
Exactly. She's carefully thinking through the whole thing.
Okay, so walk me through this. What does she actually do?
So she gets Solomon's letter, right? She doesn't just go charging in. She takes her time, thinks it over, talks to her advisors, puts her people first.
Smart. Not what you'd expect from a defeated ruler, for sure.
Right. And don't forget, she picks diplomacy over war.
Which, let's be real, not a lot of rulers back then would choose that route.
Exactly. That's huge. Like, talk about courage.
Yeah, it takes guts to choose diplomacy when you're facing someone as powerful as Solomon.
Big time. But remember, her submission wasn't actually to Solomon.
Right, it was to God.
She recognized God's power in Solomon, and she chose to get on board with that.
That's like next level wisdom.
Right.
Recognizing something bigger than both of them and choosing to be a part of it.
Totally. So I'm curious, does the Qur'an ever say women can't be in charge?
Oh, good question. Because this would have been the perfect place to mention it.
Right. Like, hey, by the way.
Exactly. But Dr. Hasan talks about how some traditional Islamic scholars, they downplay the queen's story.
Really? Why would they do that?
Well, they sometimes use hadiths.
Hold on, for those of us who skipped that Sunday school class?
Oh, right. Hadiths are like sayings and stories about the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay, got it.
And some scholars, they use these hadiths to argue against women being leaders.
So they're bringing in outside sources to support their point.
Yeah, and Dr. Hasan, she's pushing back against that whole idea. She's saying, look, the Quran itself, it doesn't condemn her rule at all.
So if the Quran wanted to say women can't lead, this would have been the time.
Exactly. It's a really important point she makes.
It's almost like they couldn't handle a powerful queen, even though it's right there in the text.
It's like we said, maybe we're only seeing what we want to see.
It makes you think twice about whose perspective we're getting,
For sure. History is never simple. There's always more to the story.
Totally. And sometimes you got to dig a little deeper to find it. It really makes you think about, like, going back to the original source, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Thinking critically about what we're reading.
And you know what I find fascinating?
What's that?
The Queen of Sheba, her story, it's not just some, like, ancient history lesson.
No.
It can teach us about leadership, even today.
Okay, now you've got to explain that one.
Yeah.
How does, like, an ancient queen connect to, boardrooms and all that?
Think about the qualities she embodies. Strategic thinking, diplomacy, communicating clearly, making those tough decisions, putting her people first.
You're right.
Timeless leadership skills, right?
Yeah, and she didn't just jump into action.
No.
She took the time to really analyze, get all the information, weigh her options. That whole scene with her advisors, like leadership 101.
Exactly. Getting different perspectives, building consensus.
That's huge no matter what, no matter the time period.
Right. It shows that good leadership, it's not about knowing everything.
Yeah, more about navigating the chaos.
It's about making informed decisions, yeah.
Yeah.
Bringing people together. You know, this actually reminds me of something else Dr. Hasan brings up.
Oh.
She talks about this thing called excessive exegetical narrativization.
Okay, I'm going to need a translation for that one.
It's a mouthful, I know. Basically, it's when people add in those extra details, stories that aren't really in the original text.
Oh, you mean like adding their own 2 cents?
Exactly. And it seems harmless, but it can really twist the meaning.
Oh, totally. It's like that game we played as kids, Telephone.
Yes. Things get lost in translation. And Dr. Hasan talks about how this happened with the Queen of Sheba story, too. People added all these things about, like, her looks, if she married Solomon.
Wow.
Even stories about her ancestors being, like, mythical creatures.
Wow. So they're basically trying to make her fit their own image.
Exactly. It's human nature, right?
Right.
But we have to be aware of it, especially with these important texts and stories.
Because those little details, they can bury the real story.
And the real lessons.
Yeah.
And that's why Dr. Hasan's work is so important. It makes us look closer, question what we think we know.
So it's not just about reading the story, it's about, like, really thinking about it.
Yeah, and recognizing our own biases, right?
Yeah.
Making sure we're not just seeing what we want to see.
Thinking for ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Being curious. Asking questions. That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
And the more we learn about the past, maybe the better we can understand the present.
Exactly.
And the Queen of Sheba, she's a perfect example of that, like this powerful diplomatic leader. It just goes to show women have always been making history. Her story is just one of many. So many stories waiting to be rediscovered.
It makes you wonder, what other incredible stories are hidden out there? What are we missing?
It's a great question to leave us with. The Queen of Sheba, she reminds us that there's always more to learn. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.